Well, welcome to part two. In part one, we concentrated on China, and now I would like to look at, first of all, India, and then I will go on and discuss food shortages as they relate to countries in the West, and in particular Australia and New Zealand. But first of all, let's just have a recap of the story that we were telling in part one.
कुछ नहीं है, आप खुद चल के देख लें। सारे डिब्बे खाली पड़े हैं, हमारे सारी टोकरी सब खाली पड़ा है, पूरा मेरा किचन। और उसी में भूखों की वजह से मेरा बच्चा ख़त्म हो गया 4 महीने का होके।
Nafisa is just one of millions in India who cannot feed herself or her family. Worldwide, as many as 132 million more people than previously projected could go hungry in 2020. This year's gain may be more than triple any increase this century. Even at a time of ample food supplies, the pandemic has sharpened the world's deep inequalities. India now has the second highest number of cases in the world, trailing only the US. But for many, hunger is a more immediate threat than the virus.
हाँ, डर लागत है तो क्या करब, घर में खाएगा तो है नहीं है तो दवाई गोली कराओ। अब खाना पीना साहब चावल है, बस आटा है, बस देख लो अंदर जाके।
It's an especially cruel tragedy in India, a country that boasts about having the world's largest food aid program. its government warehouses are brimming with more than 15% of global stockpiles of food aid. And yet, millions of Indians are being locked out of receiving this aid because they don't have access to a government-issued ration card.
राशन कार्ड नहीं से है जैसे पैदा भन तैसे राशन कार्ड के मुँह नहीं दिखा कौन तनक बात हाँ कईयों दगाए हैं कागज 2-3 फार्म भरवा हो तो दस्तखत तो करते नहीं हैं बस भगा देते हैं धमकी दे के बस भाग जाओ वोट नहीं दिए ये नहीं दिए वो नहीं दिए बस अब क्या करेंगे अब ये सरकार में तो कुछ नहीं बनने वाला है.
How exactly does this ration card system work? Under India's food law, about 67% of the country's total population is entitled to receive as many as 5 kilos of rice, wheat, and coarse grains at subsidized rates as low as 1 rupee per kilogram per person. For Mubina, the ration card means survival.
कभी कभी ऐसा है कि भूखे पेट भी सोना पड़ता है क्योंकि हमारे पास राशन कार्ड जो हमें इकट्ठा गल्ला मिल जाए तो हम कुछ दिन अपना चला सकें और जो पैसा हमारे पास जो 50 रुपए 10-20 रुपए जो इकट्ठा रोज़ का आ जाता है तो हम उससे अपनी सब्जी भाजी वगैरह मंगा सकें मगर ऐसा कुछ भी नहीं हो पा रहा है. तो लॉकडाउन के बाद ये काम बिल्कुल बंद हो गया. मेरा काम जो सिलाई का था वो तो बिल्कुल बंद है. लोगों के घरों में खाने को नहीं है तो वो मुझे सिलाई के लिए कपड़े नहीं देंगे कि हम खाएं क्या, हम अपने बच्चों को क्या खिलाएं कि अभी राशन कार्ड बन नहीं रहे हैं, सिलाई बंद हो गई है, फिर उनको बहाना मिल गया कि अब लॉकडाउन.
So what's the real reason tens of millions are locked out of the assistance? Some say bureaucratic difficulties were the single most important reason blocking access to the food program. But the biggest problem is that it's woefully underfunded. The current budget is based on 2011 to 2012 census data. At that time, India's population was 1.2 billion people. Now, it's roughly 1.38, which means that more than 100 million people are being left out of the allotted budget. That means local authorities receive more applications than they have quotas for.
गोदामें भरी हैं, अनाज सड़ रहा है एक तरफ, दूसरी तरफ आप देख रहे हैं कि गांव में भूख से मौतें हो रही हैं, लोग भूख से बिलबिला रहे हैं, लोगों को काम नहीं मिल पा रहा.
That's Vajabaya. He's part of a food aid NGO working to distribute food especially to those rejected or left waiting to be approved by the government's food aid program. The government has taken some steps to mitigate the situation as COVID-19 continues to spread. Stimulus measures include offering an additional 5 kilogram grain package per person for free until November to the more than 800 million who are covered by the food program. But the problem remains that millions haven't been granted access and are left in limbo waiting. For Kasaria is another story of a lost son.
खां का नहा घर में वहाँ से आओ है सूरत के खां का नहीं रहता तब आप फांसी लगा कर मर गया है. बहुत दिन से करी था नहीं राशन कार्ड बनाते बस जाते राशन कार्ड हो राशन कार्ड नहीं रहा कौन लड़का के कमा थी का खाई है यहाँ न राशन कार्ड कुछ नहीं है कहीं मर के चला गया है.
Our next report tells you more.
2020 will be a year that Xi Jinping would like to forget. His list of problems keeps growing. It began with the Wuhan virus that led to record unemployment, poverty, an economic slowdown, and a global backlash. Now, China could be struggling to ensure it has enough food for every citizen. Earlier this year, Xi Jinping appealed to all Chinese citizens to clean their plates. As if on cue, the Chinese state media began a campaign. Citizens were encouraged to order less, while restaurants rewarded those who wiped their plates clean. In August, restaurants in Chinese cities were rewarding customers to clean their plates with coupons and cash rebates. Upmarket hotels, like the Marriott, trimming their buffets. By taking off dishes from the menu, the price of a buffet at the Sheraton in Ningbo went down to $22 per person because of their reduced food options. Why was this public campaign necessary? Because China may not have enough fresh food to go around. Reportedly, several food items are in short supply. There is a shortage of pork after an outbreak of African swine fever. Reports say pork prices in China soared 135% in February this year. Corn could be in short supply too. Reports say this year's corn crop has been ruined by floods. Supplies of eggs, seafood, and green vegetables were affected too. The Chinese state media denies all claims of a food crisis. But Beijing is reaching out to suppliers. It is on a global hunt for supplies. China's imports of barley, corn, sorghum, and wheat have jumped by more than 83%. Reportedly, there could be a shortfall of 20 to 30 million tons of grain this season. Beijing could be trying to fill the gap with imports. Buyers have already locked in 17 million tons of corn for 2020 to 2021. China does waste an awful amount of food. Back in 2015, the Chinese Academy of Sciences estimated that 17 to 18 million tons of food was wasted in China. This should be enough to feed a country about the size of South Korea. China is now the world's largest agricultural importer. It is now banking on the same imports to tackle a looming food crisis. The United Nations predicts the world is facing a food crisis that hasn't been seen in at least 50 years.
India's retail inflation may stay elevated for at least 3 more months after hitting a 6-year high in October, as excess rain has damaged standing crops and seedlings, while edible oils that the country imports have become expensive. The high prices are a particular cause of concern for hundreds of millions of poor people, who have already been squeezed by the coronavirus pandemic and its impact on an economy that contracted a record 23.9% in April to June. Food items such as onions, potatoes, eggs, meat and tomatoes have a nearly 46% weight in the retail inflation basket. Food inflation shot up to 11.07% in October, the highest in 9 months according to data released on Thursday, sending overall retail inflation surging to 7.61%. We were expecting a hefty correction in vegetable prices, but just before harvesting, excessive rainfall damaged crops, said a vegetable trader based in the western state of Maharashtra that dominates India's onion and oilseeds production. Parts of India's richest state was battered by untimely rain last month. Many farmers are having to prepare seedlings again for planting, and this will delay supplies from the new season crop, the vegetable trader said.
Welcome to Healthy News Channel. Please like, share and subscribe to this channel to reach out more people. Will coronavirus lockdown cause food shortages in India? The market in Lasinggaon in the western Indian state of Maharashtra usually thrums with farmers and traders. But the mostly migrant men and women who unload, load and grade onions, an essential part of the diet of millions of Indians, are missing. The market, which accounts for a third of India's onion produce, managed to stumble along for nearly a week after India imposed a strict 21-day lockdown and suspended bus, train and air travel to prevent the spread of coronavirus. But the lockdown also led to an unprecedented exodus of workers from their places of work to their homes in far-flung villages all over the country. Farmers were still able to go to their fields and pick onions after the government made it clear that agriculture was an essential service. And a few workers had stayed back to keep the Lasingdown market running. But then came a news report that one person had tested positive for COVID-19 in the neighborhood, and panic set in. The day the market stalled, some 450 tons of onions were waiting to be transported all over India as well as to the port in Mumbai for export. First the trucks stopped coming. Then some laborers fled. Then came the news about the virus patient. The rest of the workers fled, Manoj Jain, an onion trader, told me. Maintaining social distance in a crowded auction market was becoming very difficult too. More than 1,700 kilometers (1,056 miles) away in eastern Bihar state, a farmer found himself in a similar quandary. Transporting food is a big challenge after the shutdown. Manowan Chowdhury, who grows rice, vegetables and fruit and rears livestock on his 30-acre farm in Samastipur district, told me that the workers he employed were locals who lived across the road. But they were refusing to come to work. They are scared to even cross the road and come to the farm because they believe they won't be allowed to return, Mr. Chowdhury told me. There's so much stigma and misinformation here about the virus that villagers have stopped going out completely. When I told one of my workers that she should be washing her hands regularly, she asked me whether she could drink cow urine as a remedy instead. We can't even farm while maintaining social distance in the field. Coronavirus outbreak could cripple India's economy. India's pandemic lockdown turns into a human tragedy. More than half of India's workforce engages in farming, while agriculture contributes some 16% to the country's GDP. India is one of the world's largest producers of crops like rice, wheat, sugarcane, cotton, vegetables and milk. Now there are concerns that stopping farm activity will not only end up hurting farmers and laborers but also affect food security. The lockdown couldn't have come at a worse time. India's peak farm activity happens between April and June. This is when the winter crop, wheat, rice and pulses, is harvested and sold. It is also peak season for fruits. And it is also when farmers begin sowing the summer rain-fed crop, comprising paddy, pulses, cotton and sugarcane. The lockdown has hit both these seasons, says Mekhala Krishnamurthy, an associate professor of sociology and anthropology at Ashoka University. India has more than 7,000 wholesale crop markets. Also, even before the outbreak, Indian farmers were struggling. Low crop prices had led to a massive slowdown of rural consumption. Even in normal times, said Mr. Chowdhury, farming has become unviable. Some 200,000 farmers have taken their lives in India since 1997. Most of the suicides have been linked to poverty, debt, a sharp rise in costs and crop failures due to pest attacks. The government has announced a $23 billion £18 million relief package to provide food security and cash transfers to the poor. But it has been criticized for being inadequate. State governments are trying to mop up funds to procure crops. Tamil Nadu in the south is planning to loan tractors to farmers, but it's unclear whether they will be able to operate them. It is also not clear how supply chains can be eased without opening up some public transport. And there are other pressing challenges. Media caption coronavirus, heartbreaking scenes as India lockdown sparks mass migration. How will migrant workers be persuaded to return to the farms? How quickly will nervous buyers of the crops begin to procure at pre-lockdown levels? If they buy less, there will be a rise in food prices in the market, and a further fall in income for farmers. But it's not all bad news. For instance, there are attempts to move things on the ground. India has some 7,500 big wholesale farm markets and another 25,000 small weekly markets. Some of them have begun reopening and they are trying to figure out how to operate and transport produce and maintain social distancing, says Dr. Krishnamurthy. Also, the winter crop has been bountiful. India has a robust food stockpile, some 60 million tons of food grains, and the world's largest state-run food distribution program. Food shortages are unlikely. But the challenges are in supporting farmers, sharecroppers and laborers until things return to normal, getting food to the poor and securing the harvest for the next season. Despite the formidable odds, Indian farmers appear to be largely resilient. Our problem is the market is closed and there's no transport, so we are unable to sell. But I am in my farm now, working alone, Ganesh Nanot, a cotton farmer from Akola, Maharashtra, told me on the phone. Then he sent me a selfie from the farm to prove that he was not losing hope.
Now I would like to turn my attention to my own part of the world. If I want to get information about other parts of the world, China, India, it's relatively easy. But getting information about anything about my own country, New Zealand, well, it's just like hen's teeth. And most of the information about what's happening around us comes from anecdote, from talking to people in shops and the like. So one thing that I do know from my partner's visits to the local butcher's shop that caters for those in our community with less money is that the shop is full of cheaper pork that has been dumped on the market, or we think has been dumped on the market, from a country that we learn is on the verge of hunger, China. So good luck finding any documentary confirmation of that. You won't find it. At the same time, there's very little of our own meat, of our own beef, of our own lamb on the shelves. Either it is largely unavailable or it's very expensive, and things like offal, which we've been used to kind of feeding to our animals, seems to be almost completely unavailable. So I've got very little idea of what is happening in our abattoirs and if there is any disruption. But I think a clue as to why there's sort of disruption in food can be found in the following, which was very hard to find our way back to in the search engines. We had this article. The red meat industry, they say, is export orientated, with a full 85% of the country's lamb and mutton that we're so known for being exported. So what proportion of this is going to China, I have no idea. Meanwhile, we have this. China has, in addition to blaming Australia and India for COVID-19, has claimed that the virus has been found on New Zealand frozen meat exports. As a postscript, I think I've found the answer. I found my way to an article from the New Zealand Herald, and I'm damned if I'm going to pay to go behind a paywall to find out what's in it, but I found the caption, and the caption says, last year China represented 54% of sheep meat exports, 212,000 tonnes worth $1.6 billion. So of the 95% of all our meat going to export, then 54% of that 95% is going to China. And so meanwhile, while our dear leader Jacinda Ardern is bringing in cultural workers and numerous others, we have a shortage of people to pick our own fruit and vegetables, because we usually rely on people coming in from the Pacific Islands, and we don't, and still not providing any incentive for people who would be otherwise unemployed to go and do the picking.
Age Farmer broadcast, and we begin in New Zealand, where the government has instituted policies which, while allowing musicians and non-essential workers of any sort to come in from anywhere in the world, migrant farm workers are summarily denied entrance, even from countries that have no COVID-19 outbreaks. Take a listen.
Right, as we heard earlier this morning, Immigration New Zealand has granted border exemptions to some offshore musicians to participate in the Summer Winery Tour, 29, I think. And as all rugby fans are well aware, immigration accommodations have been made for the Australian rugby team, plus the English netball team and the West Indies and Pakistan cricket teams, the America's Cup teams. But for experienced seasonal fruit pickers, even from completely COVID-19 free Samoa, they haven't had a single case, our borders remain shut. How many people would normally come in? How many fruit pickers come in?
About 14,000.
14,000?
Yes. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
And what happens if you don't get them? What happens to fruit picking? What happens to horticulture generally? It's not just fruit, it's veggies, the whole lot. What happens to it?
Well, we won't get harvested. The crops will rot on the ground and prices will increase really quickly, as well as which there'll be a lot of loss of work for our packers, because if we don't have fruit to pack, we don't have work for them.
And presumably there's just downstream domino after domino falling, right?
Well, fruit and vegetable prices are set to soar by up to 25% due to a COVID-induced labour shortage. Travel restrictions have led to 50,000 fewer backpackers in Australia, and that has forced fruit and vegetable growers to pay top dollar now to secure pickers in time for harvest. That is driving up prices. Summer vegetables, stone fruit and grapes are expected to be the hardest hit. And National Farmers Federation CEO Tony Ma joins me now. Tony, good morning to you. Look, farmers' hands appear tied here. Do they have any other options to try to avoid this price hike?
Not really, Matt. Really, labour has been an issue for farmers for some time, and as you say, planes haven't been landing in this country for some time now. So the labour issue has been exacerbated. Farmers are really struggling to get labour to pick all of that wonderful fruit and vegetables that you said. So that's strawberries, plums, table grapes, mangoes, these sorts of things that we just love in summer.
So what is the solution here? How do we break through this? Industry's able to pay more, or those harvesting earlier are expected, of course, to be advantaged. Could this leave some farmers struggling to pick and pack their products?
Yeah, it can, and it already has. So we hope that we can get some expansion in things like the working holiday maker scheme when planes do start to land, and the seasonal worker program. So workers that have come from Pacific Island countries that haven't got COVID disease, we want to expand the bubble, the quarantine bubble that we've got in place at the moment. So we desperately need workers. We have for some time, but we really hope that farmers can manage the current situation to continue to provide the fruit and vegetables and and products that consumers are really wanting this time of year as we go into Christmas.
Now, Tony, what if the planes, can't get in the numbers predicted? Is there a way to make the industry more appealing, more lucrative for domestic workers?
Yeah, that's what we'd really like to see. The governments have put $6,000 on the table to help with travel and accommodation expenses. So we'd really like to see, students that are finishing school at the moment or having a break from uni go out and see rural and regional Australia, get a job on a farm and experience all the great things that rural and regional Australia and farming can provide. So really want to see those people have a gap year in Australia, perhaps, instead of having a gap year in Europe.
Yeah, absolutely. A great way to sort of savour the regions and get out and experience what country Australia has to offer. Thank you very much, Tony. Here's
San Antonio Food Bank in Texas is one of those groups. Take a look at the lines there last week. I mean, let this sink in. The food bank serves 8 semi-truckloads of food to people in need every day. They say the numbers are so high, they have to ration food. Eric Cooper's with us now. He's the CEO of the San Antonio Food Bank. Eric, thank you so much for being here and for everything you do. In America, the richest country in all the world, we have incredible hunger. How is this possible?
Well, Shepard, I tell you, today we had a distribution that fed 2,000, and we have these distributions all the time. And a woman in the line said, Eric, I juggled kids and my job. Now I have no job, no income, no savings, and no food. For Feeding America food banks around the country, all of us are seeing this unprecedented demand. And we're just working as hard as we can to balance the private donations we get with the public assistance to try to make sure people are there.
I'm sorry.
COVID-19 is...
No, please go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt.
Well, COVID-19 has taken so much, right? People's jobs, they've taken their loved ones, and now we're just trying to keep it from taking Thanksgiving.
Eric, we watch as schools close, and a lot of us have been wondering, those school meals are essential for so many kids, and I wonder if they're still getting the meals they need.
Well, for so many of those schools, they were able to nourish kids because they could convene them in school. Now with distant learning, kids online, they're missing those meals. A child would miss 10 meals in a week. And if a mom has 2 or 3 kids in school, she's now feeling the impact of the cost of that food at home. And without employment, kids are going hungry. And we're hearing from schools that kids are struggling with their education because they don't have access to good nutrition.
It's just incredible. I know here in New York City, at least, the public schools provide the meals if you can come get them and that sort of thing. And I'm sure a lot of cities do that, but certainly not everywhere. And I wonder, I know you interact with a lot of people at the food bank. Are you seeing different faces, different groups of people now during the pandemic?
Well, pre-pandemic, we fed about 60,000 people a week, and now we're seeing about 120,000 people a week. And most of those are new to the food banks. They've never had to ask for help before. I think of a couple that I met at our distribution, an elderly couple that as they were driving through to pick up their groceries, the wife rolled down her window just to say thank you. And as I started to talk with them, I said, well, what do you want people to know about what's going on in your family and this hardship? And, the gentleman just bowed his head and started to get emotional. He was wearing a mask and he just said, it's hard. It's hard. It's so hard. And I think for these families that are just trying to meet the basic need of food.
"2021 is likely to be the worst humanitarian crisis year since the start of the United Nations 75 years ago," World Food Programme Chief David Beasley warns. "The shutdowns will kill millions of the world's poorest people. The cure must not be worse than the virus. It turned out it is. The population is growing. Poor people keep having children they can't afford to support. Migration from one desperate country to another soon to be depressed by the ever-growing horde. The UN World Food Programme was the winner of the Nobel Peace Prize in 2020, and the head of that agency is warning of the potential for absolutely devastating famines around the globe in 2021. The lockdowns that were instituted all over the world this year created tremendous hardship in many wealthy countries, but in poorer nations, the economic devastation has created alarming waves of hunger. There was hope that things would get better when lockdowns were being lifted, but now a new round of lockdowns is being imposed, and many experts are warning about what this could mean for those living in deep poverty. David Beasley was absolutely thrilled when his agency was given the Nobel Peace Prize because all of the attention has given him more opportunities to ask for money. Because without a massive influx of money, he says that we are going to see famines of biblical proportions in 2021. The perfect recipe for a global financial reset. The Great Reset world leaders, globalists, and technocrats are talking about a one world currency. In America, 34 million Americans are in poverty, including 12 million children, while the richest 400 individuals have $3.2 trillion in wealth. Millions of Americans don't have enough money to feed their families. People are out of work, short of cash, and looking to food banks to fill the table. An Associated Press analysis of data provided by food banks in the Feeding America network found a nearly 60% increase in the amount of food distributed since the pandemic began. The fourth quarter of 2020 will be the drop-off for so many businesses. More than 500,000 restaurants are at risk of closing amid the economic free fall. That's what happens when you shut down the economy. The government shut down restaurants, not the virus. The reset is working masterfully. They are seeking to destroy small businesses in America. What better way to pick up some business, close them, let them go broke, then buy them for a song? This is the greatest wealth transfer in world history. They will destroy everything and force us to be solely dependent on government handouts. The end result is total reliance on the government. Governors are closing private businesses, which prevents people from financially supporting themselves. The trickle-down effects of this will be far-reaching across many job markets and manufacturing facilities. California, for example, is still shutting down entire sectors of private businesses and expecting people to survive on unemployment handouts. Meanwhile, in Ohio, there are sanitation restrictions, but private businesses are not being forced to close. The current illusion of capitalism that America is operating under is 100% immoral. People don't think anything is wrong here, that our billionaires got even richer through this pandemic. This country is broken. 15 days to flatten the curve morphed into indefinite lockdowns, with studies showing the lockdowns made things worse.